This video is sponsored by Shaker and Spoon. What's up, guys? Michael here with a special holiday treat. Today, I'm going to dive back into the MCU of religious film franchises, God's Not Dead. In the second installment, we see my childhood crush, Clarissa, who explained it all, playing a teacher who gets persecuted by the state for briefly quoting the Bible in an AP history class. Like the first film, God's Not Dead 2 sets out to objectively prove the existence of an all-knowing divine entity. It's like Thanos, but more into plagues than snaps. But does it raise any valid theological or philosophical points? Or does it exist solely to make my childhood Sunday school classes look super woke by comparison? Well, let's find out in our first ever Philosopher Reacts to a sequel, God's Not Dead 2. And spoilers ahead for a movie that dares to ask, what if white Southern evangelical Christians are actually the most oppressed group in America? But before I get into it, I want to tell you about this video's sponsor, Shaker and Spoon. Shaker and Spoon makes it easy to create unusual and elevated cocktails from the comfort of home. Shaker and Spoon is a monthly cocktail subscription box that delivers carefully curated ingredients straight to your door. Every box includes 3 exclusive recipes, plus all of the fixings you need to complete a total of 12 cocktails. I tried the Fall for Mezcal box, whose recipes include ingredients I'd never heard of before, and flavor combinations I definitely couldn't have come up with on my own, like a pineapple shrub and some citrus-infused ginger beer for the El Plenque cocktail. All I had to do was provide my own bottle of mezcal, and all of the recipes in this box were ready to go. Choosing my favorite mezcal is way easier than trying to track down cherry vanilla bitters on my own, especially if I'd have to commit to buying a huge or expensive bottle. With Shaker and Spoon, all ingredients get used up along with that trusty bottle of hooch, which is both convenient and pretty darn tasty. Like, seriously, look at this sage-infused agave syrup. I'd never heard of this before, and it rules. I tried it in the Brush of the Bush cocktail in this box, and it was savory, sweet, and pretty unforgettable. And don't even get me started on how the third cocktail in this box was infused with actual roses. The instructions were so easy that I didn't get intimidated by the recipes either. Instead, I could focus on the fun of mixology. And you know, the fun of drinking. Just like you have multiple options with every Shaker and Spoon box, you also have a couple of ways to score $20 off your first box. You could click the link below and use code Wisecrack, or go directly to shakerandspoon.com/wisecrack. Either way, you're in for a sweet deal on a delicious experience. That's shakerandspoon.com/wisecrack for $20 off your first box. And now, back to the show. Okay, let's start in Sabrina's classroom, where she's teaching about Gandhi and Martin Luther King Jr.
And so peaceful nonviolence comes first in India under Gandhi, and then later here in the United States under Dr. King and others as a means of achieving civil rights. But what makes nonviolence so radical is its unwavering commitment to a nonviolent approach, not just initially, but in the face of escalating persecution by the opposing force.
Okay, so Clarissa is doing a decent job of explaining it all, for the most part. It's a bit weird to imply that Gandhi invented peaceful nonviolence. After all, this perspective has its religious origins in Jainism, Hinduism, and Buddhism, which way predate him. But hey, she's an overworked and underpaid public school teacher, so who are we to judge? It's also worth noting that for King, nonviolence wasn't just an ethical stance, but a type of political strategy. Now, he believed that nonviolent protests for civil rights would ultimately be more effective than violence in arousing solidarity. When asked about civil rights protests in the South, King said the movement was ideally arousing the dozing conscience of the white community and hoping to ultimately achieve the beloved community and the type of brotherhood that is necessary for us to survive in a meaningful manner. But things are about to get a little, tense in the classroom.
Isn't that sort of like what Jesus meant when he said that we should love our enemies?
Oh, you're gonna get her in so much trouble, kid. Why did you ask that?
Yes, you have heard it said, love your neighbor and hate your enemy. But I tell you, love your enemies and pray for those who persecute you, that you will be children of your Father in heaven. Dr. King confirmed the link, describing his
Look at
inspiration
this kid snitching on his cell phone.
Saying, Christ furnished the spirit and motivation, while Gandhi furnished the method.
Except that didn't work. Jesus got himself killed and everybody knows that.
Well, so did Dr. King.
Okay, now this, believe it or not, is where pops off. Now, the notion of Jesus being entirely nonviolent is debatable. After all, he does at one point say he didn't come to bring peace, but a sword. So our grown-up teenage witch might be missing some subtlety here. But what's most important is that MJ Hart quoted the Bible in a public school. And in this fever dream vision of America, that's apparently straight up criminal. She's quickly suspended for the offense, but refuses to apologize to the school board. Now she's about to go on trial, which is very realistic, so let's meet her courtroom adversary.
The last thing we need is a bunch of religious fanatics protesting outside of our house.
We'll work to keep it out of the media for now. But next year, when you're applying to all the colleges, you'll be able to tell the story of how Brooke was part of a landmark constitutional case concerning the separation of church and state.
Okay, so this is a side note, but it's very funny that for the part of liberal lawyer, they cast an actor who once played the literal devil on a show called Reaper.
I can be nice.
To be a fly on that casting room wall. Also, just in case the filmmakers are watching, if you're casting a heretical and charming YouTube host for God's Not Dead 5, Web of Sin, feel free to let me know in the comments. I'm very affordable. Okay, let's get back to Satan.
We're going to prove once and for all that God is dead.
And now we're really cooking. So just like in the first installment, we have a sinister dude whose life mission seems to be proving that God is dead. Now, from a philosophical perspective, this is a pretty meaningless call to action. It would be one thing to try and argue that it's metaphysically improbable that an omnipotent creator exists. But it's another thing altogether to argue that God is dead. It's not like anyone would say the Loch Ness Monster is dead. We just say it doesn't exist, but it's cool that a drunk Scotsman started a funny myth to mess with people years ago, and everyone just went with it. So where does this death of God obsession come from? Probably from a willful misreading of Nietzsche. These folks assume that when Nietzsche said God is dead, he was being an angry atheist edgelord. Instead, as we've said numerous times on this channel, he was criticizing European culture and philosophy for its own intellectual hubris. And his critiques of Christianity were specifically about its tendency to make believers care more about heaven than earth. Honestly, this whole film franchise is doing Nietzsche kind of dirty. But speaking of philosophy students who believe that religion should inspire people to transform the material conditions of their world, let's get back to MLK.
Miss Kinney, are you familiar with Dr. King's letter from a Birmingham jail?
Yes, it's a seminal piece of civil rights history.
In that letter, Dr. King makes numerous faith-based references, does he not?
Offhand, I don't recall.
Allow me to refresh your memory.
Okay, we don't need to listen to him refresh your memory, but so this is Tom, the lawyer. He's representing Sabrina / Clarissa / Melissa Joan Hart. And in connecting King's faith and his politics right here, he's bringing up the concept of political theology, which is the idea that many political systems are secularized versions of theological beliefs. Now, if that's true, it would mean we can best understand contemporary politics by critiquing their underlying theological assumptions. And he's correct to say that for MLK, faith and politics were intertwined. However, King's actual politics are pretty at odds with the ones expressed in this film. Like, they aren't super subtle about showing their own political cards. I mean, Mike Huckabee is in this movie. See, King's actual politics are what conservative evangelicals would probably call woke socialism. As King wrote in a letter to his wife, Coretta Scott King, I imagine you already know that I am much more socialistic in my economic theory than capitalistic. And it's very cool that he included that in a romantic letter to his wife. And King's belief in democratic socialism and wealth redistribution was a direct outcome of his own Christian faith. As he said, call it democracy or call it democratic socialism, but there must be a better distribution of wealth within this country for all God's children. So don't tell Sabrina, but Jesus made MLK a socialist. Speaking of Sabrina, mid-trial, she has her lawyer over for Chinese food in what feels a little too much like a date.
Listen, this isn't about faith. This is about history. Okay, maybe I'm wrong here. I'm not the law expert, but
Like a lawyer.
I think they've missed
That's what a
the
law
point.
expert's called. They're called lawyers.
I'm not sure I follow. He talked about Jesus' teachings just like they were any other verifiable fact.
Well, what if they're just that? I mean, just because certain facts happen to be recorded in the Bible doesn't mean they stop being facts. We can separate the history-based elements of Jesus' life from the faith-based element.
Okay, this is like a weird move, and it further highlights a distinction between religious faith and historical knowledge in a way that completely undermines the former. Now, it's important to note that for most of Christian history, faith wasn't dependent upon historical proof of the existence of Jesus. Faith involved an act of will and belief, not just in agreement with historical principles. Philosopher Immanuel Kant said that he found it necessary to deny knowledge in order to make room for faith. Now, by this, he didn't mean that faith was irrational or for gullible people, but that faith and knowledge are categorically distinct. Trying to comprehend faith via knowledge would be like tasting a Pinot Noir with your toes. But the lawyer goes all in on proving Jesus. He puts some witnesses on the stand, non-actors playing themselves, and has them testify about why Jesus absolutely existed. And that, he argues, confirms the validity of the Christian faith.
Can you help me prove the existence of Jesus Christ?
Absolutely. Actually, this court already affirmed it when we were called into session and the date was given. Our calendar has been split between BC and AD based on the birth of Jesus, which is quite a feat if he never existed. Beyond that,
I feel like that's not a good
historian
argument,
Gary
that the
Habermas
calendar
lists 39 ancient sources for Jesus. As the agnostic historian Bart Ehrman says, Jesus did exist, whether we like it or not. I put it this way. Denying the existence of Jesus
Witnesses
doesn't
don't
make him go
turn
away.
to the jury like that.
It merely proves
You
that
can't do
no
that.
amount of evidence will convince you.
It's not a thing. Okay, okay. While I am by no means a theologian, I'm actually decently well read in the history of Christian theology, and I can pretty confidently say that for many of the great minds of the Judeo-Christian tradition, belief was never about evidence, it was about faith. Augustine was one of the first big deal Christian theologians, and he thought that faith had to precede reason. Basically, by believing in God via pure faith, you're better able to gain knowledge of truth because God sort of shines a light to help you. As he said in his Confessions, which Usher later named an album after, the mind needs to be enlightened by light from outside itself, so that it can participate in truth, because it is not itself the nature of truth. You will light my lamp, Lord. So in trying to use reason to justify faith, my childhood crush seems to have things a little backwards. Then there's medieval theologian Thomas Aquinas, whose family kidnapped him for a year and whose brothers hired sex workers to try to sway him from joining the Dominican order. Just some fun facts. Anyway, he thought that faith was a sort of middle point between knowledge and opinion. For Aquinas, when thinking theologically, you start from a place of faith, then proceed to try to understand that faith through reason. Theology, then, for him is faith-seeking understanding. Faith thus leads us on a journey to knowledge by planting a seed in our minds. And for Aquinas, faith isn't determined by reason. Rather, it requires a commitment grounded in belief. And 20th century theologian Paul Tillich said that faith is the state of being ultimately concerned, which means that faith is more of an existential commitment than a matter of rational knowledge. As far as I know, none of these theologians were like, if we dig up Jesus' bones, then we can prove he was real and all the skateboarder kids will start going to church. But let's get back to the courtroom where the next witness is a cop. Which makes sense because Roman cops killed Jesus.
And as a devout Christian, you feel you succeeded?
Mr. Kane, I think you misunderstand me. When I began this study, I was a devout atheist. I began examining the Gospels
Who's a
as a committed
devout
skeptic,
atheist?
not as a believer. I'm simply a Christian because it's evidentially true.
Okay, so this makes me think of my guy, Soren Kierkegaard, who referred to faith as an objective uncertainty held fast in an appropriation process of the most passionate inwardness. I'll explain. Now, I've talked before about his oft-quoted line, "Truth is subjectivity," which for Kierkegaard meant that something is only true for you if you appropriate that truth into your life in an active and passionate way. i.e., a religion isn't true because an ex-LAPD officer wrote a book that says it is. It's true when it changes your life and the way you live. Another oft-discussed Kierkegaardian notion is the leap of faith. For him, this means that we can't rationally justify the choice to believe. We must take a leap of faith that transcends objective reason. Faith isn't agreeing with a proposition. It's passionately leaping into something uncertain. This applies equally well to non-religious situations. For example, in entering a relationship or committing to marriage, there is no way to rationally prove that someone is the one or that the marriage will last. So any love relationship requires a similar leap of faith. Interestingly enough, Kierkegaard was inspired by people in his day who were doing the same thing as these witnesses, relying on logic and objectivity rather than faith to justify their belief in God. And he found this incredibly ironic, making him the Alanis Morissette of 19th century Copenhagen.
And isn't it ironic?
Okay, so spoiler alert, but MJ Hart's character doesn't get the death penalty. She's found not guilty of whatever it was she was charged with, but not before her lawyer Tom absolutely freaks the out.
I think it's time that we stop pretending that we can trust a person like this to serve in a public capacity. In the name of tolerance and diversity, I say we destroy her. And if they don't pay, then we seize their property. And if they resist, well, let's not kid ourselves. Enforcement is always at the end of a gun.
Okay. Friends, enemies, trolls, I assure you that no matter what your religion or lack thereof, no American government agent is going to show up to your house and make you look down the barrel of a gun because of your religious beliefs. Now, this is actually part of a real thing called the evangelical persecution complex. It's been written about by both non-believers and believers alike to describe the danger caused by American evangelicals who believe that their faith is being actively persecuted. Writing in The Atlantic, Alan Noble, professor at Oklahoma Baptist University, says, "Too much is at stake for evangelicals to waste our resources and credibility on frivolous and occasionally self-provoked injustices. Imagined offenses drummed up by sensationalists and fearmongers should be exposed and denied. At times, even legitimate offenses should be overlooked when they are petty." And the type of persecution complex that we see in the God's Not Dead movies is a very real thing. According to a 2017 poll carried out by the Public Religion Research Institute, white evangelicals believe that they face more discrimination than Muslims, which, okay. Now, there are religious groups under threat of oppression and violence in America, but they surely aren't white Protestant Christians in the South. This part of the film feels especially icky in the light of all of the anti-Muslim and anti-Semitic violence and harassment that's all too common in America these days. Okay, so we survived another God's Not Dead film. Only 2 more to go, assuming they ever stop. At the end of the day, this movie's attempt to prove religion via historical evidence ends up undermining everything that is theologically significant about faith in the first place. For a movie that's presumably about the importance of faith, it does a really bad job of understanding it. And to be clear, I am not coming at this from some angry new atheist perspective. I was raised Catholic and have a lot of respect for many of the wonderful and weird religions of the world. If it makes people loving and kind, who am I to judge? But when evaluated from the perspective of theology and philosophy, none of this movie's gotcha moments make any sense, which is horrible for me in particular, as Clarissa and Sabrina were incredibly important influences during my formative years. Okay, that's all for this one. Tune in next holiday season for God's Not Dead 3, A Light in the Darkness, and let us know what you think in the comments. A huge thank you to all of our amazing patrons, and don't forget to check out our podcast. Hit that subscribe button like you're secretly texting the principal to tattle on your history teacher, and don't forget to ring that bell. And as always, thanks for watching. Later. Oh, that's good. Yeah, we got it. I mean, you got to do that. That's fun. So you got the clip. It's all about content for everyone here, not about people's feelings.